All right, let's see what we got to work on today. Ugh, not more poetry. All right, if you've paid any attention to my other videos, you know I don't really care too much for poetry, but I'm going to act like an adult here and I'm going to do my job and talk about poetry. Specifically, I'm going to talk about imagery in poetry. And I picked two. One is called Asparagus and the other Dandelions. I know, really weird. Who knows why? Actually, I can tell you why. Don't tell anyone, but they're really short. That's why I picked them. So let's take a look at these two short poems, but not before I talk to you about your five senses. I know you know your five senses, but the whole point of this is I want to connect it to what we're talking about with imagery. See, imagery is where you're trying to create a real clear image or an experience in someone else's head using only words to do that. We, of course, live in a world where we understand everything by our five senses. We see things. If you're looking at the chart, we hear things. You see the little ear. We, of course, can smell things. And of course, we have a sense of taste. And then finally, and more importantly than all of them, we have the pull your finger moment. No, that's not what that's about. That's about touch. We learn about the world by touch too. So these five senses are critical to us in how we perceive things in the world. And the same goes for poems. Sometimes when we're talking about imagery, a poet doesn't just want you to see something, they want you to maybe hear it, smell it, taste, or touch it the way they did. So we have the same experience. Sometimes it's a personal thing for them, but most of the time, they're trying to put an image in your head of something that they're pretty sure you've experienced too, and they want to capture that for all of us. So let's look at what I'm talking about. I did take my two poems from a book called All the Small Poems and 14 More by a poet named Valerie Worth. These are really good poems and also short. To remind you, how do we get through poems when we're trying to understand them? Well, we're going to read them out loud. Sometimes we have to reread them because they're hard. We're going to check for the poem type. In this case, I already did it for you. I'm telling you, this is a poem of imagery. We think on the title. We identify the subject and speaker if we can. We notice any allusions or historical references, which you don't have to worry about in this one. We find figurative language. You will have to look for that in this one. We figure out tone and mood. There is that in these poems. And then, of course, we try to figure out if there's a message. Now, I can say this. It's not always true, but in most poems, just about imagery, there isn't really a message. It's to connect you to an experience. Okay? Example. If I remember um, somebody making cookies for me, right? That smell in the house of freshly baked cookies, well, that's a great experience. And maybe I can write about that and put into a poem. But there really isn't a message there. All right, poem number one. Finally, asparagus. Like a nest of snakes awakened, craning long-necked out of the ground, to stand with sharp scaly heads, alert, tasting the air, taking the sun, looking around. Well, we have a nifty little poem here because even without the illustration, I know I would have seen in my head what asparagus looks like. Let's get back in here for a second. How did she do it? You already saw on the bottom, I put down word choice and a simile. What is the simile or comparison she makes for asparagus so we can understand it? She compares it to snakes, right? For a sentence, like a nest of snakes. If you've ever stumbled on a nest of snakes, why is it always snakes? You'll know that they do sort of crane their way out, like a whole bunch of them, interlacing. It's a little creepy, but they're sniffing at the air, is what they're doing. So asparagus is like that in her mind. And then she says they're awakened, craning, long necked. Great word choice, craning. Craning is kind of sticking your head up and stretching it as far as you can. You crane your neck. And that's what the asparagus appear to be doing, like a nest of snakes. They come out of the ground. They stand with sharp, scaly heads. Great word choice. Scaly, right? Think of a snake. What do you know about it? It's got scales. It looks like the asparagus has scales too. They are alert, meaning they are aware of everything around them, tasting the air. Okay, this is a little piece of brilliance because how do snakes interact with the world mostly? Well, they taste the air, right? Their little tongue comes out and they know what's going on around them. And she compares the asparagus in the same way. They take the sun because they need the sun, and so do snakes because they're cold-blooded, and they look around. This is a really well done short poem about, of all things, asparagus. And she did it mainly with word choice and one simile that she carried the whole way through. Okay? Imagery. Is there a message here? I don't think so. I mean, she likes asparagus, but mostly this is about how observant the poet is, what she notices about it. Dandelion. Out of green space, a sun, bright for a day, burning away to a husk, a cratered moon, burst in a week to dust, seeding the infinite lawn with its starry smithereens. I got to do a little thinking on this one. Dandelions. But there's a lot of stuff about like space here. I already gave you the clue in the bottom, didn't I? Yes, I did. It says this is about word choice and metaphor. So a metaphor is the same thing as a simile. She just didn't use the word like or as. And as I've said in other videos, metaphors are really powerful because they don't use like or as. What happens is when you don't use like or as, you are opening up the comparison to whatever it is that the qualities are of what you're comparing two things to. I know that's not clear, but I'll explain it. We all know what a dandelion is. Your parents probably curse at these things because they show up in the lawn. But they're basically a weed or a plant that has a nice yellow, globe shape to them. The other part of the metaphor is she compares them to basically the moon or the things you see in space, like the sun, the moon, and stars. And we know a lot of things about those objects. So here's where we go. Out of green space. At first, I didn't get that, but then it clicked. She's talking about the lawn. Okay. Out of that green area, the lawn, we see a sun bright for a day. And this is true. Dandelions, they're there for maybe a day or two before they convert over from yellow to a husk, a cratered moon. Now, you might not know what a husk is, but think of like a pumpkin. When you dig it out and get rid of all the insides and let it sit around, we call what's left a husk. It's empty inside. The cratered moon, well, look at the little illustration. If you're seeing the round ball there, that's kind of what we're talking about. It's almost like looking at the craters of a moon. It's got pockmarks on it. Burst in a week to dust, seeding the infinite lawn with its starry smithereens. Wow. Little alliteration at the end, starry smithereens. And if you don't know what smithereens are, think of when you've dropped a glass on the floor and it broke into a million little pieces. Smithereens. Okay? And when the dandelion, the wind comes along and it blows up that little globe and the little helicopters fly away from it, that's the image that she's trying to put in your head with the infinite lawn, the seeds going over the infinite lawn in starry smithereens. They're like little stars that spread out all over your lawn. A brilliant, small, short poem of imagery. Again, is there a message here? I don't know. I don't think so. I just think the poet wants me to see really, really clearly how a dandelion goes from that little yellow flower to when it turns into like a little moon and then explodes and lets all the seeds float away across my lawn. So there you have it. A couple of short poems. I did it under 10 minutes, so I'm feeling a little good about myself and hopefully have a better understanding of imagery in poetry.